you study playing in a free jazz style, do you think it's important to be able to do that? How much time have you put into it? Well, I mean, if you are a person that doesn't like that kind of music, then I would say your amount of time would be less that you need to. I'm all about gathering information. I'm all about being comfortable in any scenario because you never know exactly where you're going to find yourself, or what people might expect of you, or you might be surprised to find out what some of your heroes have done that may not be only like one type of music or whatever type of music that they're most known for. It could be a lot of different things. I think I had a little bit of that experience kind of playing with some people that some of my teachers had played with. So Steve Teray, playing with a number of people, and I didn't know too much about his work with Lester Bowie and the Brass Fantasy. Didn't know too much about it and kind of what that was all about. And then I kind of started playing with Bob Stewart, who's a tuba player, played in that band. And we did a bunch of gigs, and Bob kind of talked about a bunch of different things and played in a certain kind of way and kind of led the band in a certain kind of way, which led me to kind of investigate more the connection between playing straight ahead and playing free music. I would say that I've listened to it and I've done some experimenting, but I think the spirit of that music is pervasive in that I want to achieve the freedom that comes in that music, maybe in a more structured setting. And I think there's a connotation that sort of music is just totally free and random. And while some of it is, or could be, that a lot of it is very organized, and a lot of it is very much predetermined in terms of what it's trying to achieve. And I think to kind of sometimes people, especially straight ahead jazz musicians, sometimes put that music in a box and say like, oh, it's not for me, or like that's not jazz, or that's not whatever. And that's fine. People can have their opinions, but I think there's a deep connection to get out of that in terms of the freedom of expression. And thinking about going beyond the notes, that's really important, because we focus on what notes to play so often, but we don't always focus on how the notes are played. And I think that playing that kind of music, it might open your ears, and it might open your abilities about saying, I say this a lot to myself and to my students, like, what else? New techniques or new whatever, like how do I make new sounds on my instrument? And so exploring free music can help you do that. In music college, is it best to shed as much as possible or play and try to get gigs? The answer is both. You should shed as much as possible, and you should also try to play gigs. Putting in as much time on the fundamentals as you can during college is important. I think figuring out first, the most important thing is to figure out how you work best. So like, how long can you practice for that is worthwhile, or how long can you practice for that is effective, right? So different people have different length of time, so you want to find that out. And then you also want to play as much as possible, because playing in the practice room is one thing, and you got to put in the time, you got to put in the fundamentals, but you also have to play with people as much as possible. So I am super glad that even though it might have been a little unhealthy, that I was obsessed with getting the fundamentals in every single day, from when I started college to definitely until I moved into New York. But that time of practicing every single day, I would take my instrument with me anywhere that I went. There was not a day there might have been a day or two, but I would practice almost every day during college. And that foundation is what's allowed me to be able to do so many things now. And then it's allowed me to have a good foundation to jump off of. So Ben, the answer is both. Build up as much practice time as you can. You have to do your fundamentals routine and build up your fundamentals. You have to work on your technique or classical music kind of side of things. Then you got to work on jazz and jazz vocabulary, playing tunes. And so that's at least, if you spend 2 hours on each, that's 4 to 6 hours maybe that you should be practicing, and then you should be playing gigs too, especially now that it's summer. During school you might play a little less gigs and do a little bit more practicing, but you got to do both, because you want to blur the line. There's no like instant magical, I'm graduated, now give me the gigs. If you haven't been playing gigs, you won't be playing gigs when you finish. So you have to be working on both at the same time. Do you always do guide tone exercises when learning new tunes you want to improvise over? I guess the literal answer is no. The longer answer, if you can't hear the guide tones, if you can't hear the voice leading without playing through it, you do need to do it. And so one way that I find is kind of like a shortcut to learning the melody, the harmony, the bass line, the thirds and sevenths, the guide tones all at once, is to play the piano. So what I do is I don't have a huge amount of piano skills, but the piano skills that I do have allow me to play the bass notes and learn the bass motion in the left hand, and I play the thirds and the sevenths in the right hand, or maybe a couple more notes, and then I sing the melody. So then I'm practicing all those things at once. And so that way I don't have to sit and play through them on my trombone, because it's not trombone specific, right? If you're learning a tune, that is instrument agnostic. If you can, a tune is a tune, and I think the reason why I say bass players or piano players might know tunes a little bit more deeply is because they're playing the harmony all the time, right? And as a soloist, you're like playing the harmony, then you're improvising, then you're playing the melody, and then you're like doing this, all these different roles, but they're kind of doing them all at the same time. So if you can get in the habit of doing that yourself and learning how to comp for yourself and sing the melody and have that gives you connection between your voice and your instrument and your brain and your ears, and it kind of gets it all together. So I find that that's the shortcut, but most people when they're starting out don't have all of those skills yet. So walking a bass line on your instrument is important, and then playing through the guide tone line, starting on the third and then starting on the seventh or starting on the ninth. It's just seeing where they go. And so I think that's important. And then I think it's also important after you can hear them, if you don't need to play through them, the third to the seventh or the third to the seventh, all that stuff is going to kind of stay between tunes. But what doesn't stay between tunes sometimes is like your ability to hear your own guide tone line. This is kind of where I focus more. So if I start on any note, how do I connect all the notes, right? So I kind of think about it like species counterpoint. So if you don't know about species counterpoint, go look it up. But that's like basically thinking like one note against another note. Second species is like two notes against one note. So when you think about it in counterpoint instead of in addition to the voice leading, it allows you to say, okay, here's the bass note, here's the harmony, and I got to just find one note to play against every other note as we go through. And then you do two notes. So it's like half notes against whole notes, or quarter notes against half notes, depending on how fast the harmony's moving. And then you have to improvise that counterpoint. Instead of thinking about, oh, I just got to play the same guide tone line again. If you're actually improvising counterpoint, it gives you a whole new perspective on what you're working on, how you can change it every chorus. So the long answer to Daniel's question is that no, I don't do guide tone exercises, but I do voice leading exercises and counterpoint exercises often. And so I try to cheat a little bit and play everything on the piano. I mean, playing the piano is kind of like the cheat code to like practicing all of it at the same time for a single note player, like myself as a trombone player, or like walking bass lines. But I try to incorporate all of those things, and we're working on all the same stuff, which is voice leading, knowing the tune and knowing the harmony and everything. Find ways to combine your practice together so that you can work on more than one thing at a time. When you encounter a problem in your practice, do you always write down what the problem is and then come up with a strategy to fix it? That's not my strategy for practicing. When I encounter a problem when I'm practicing, I try to address it right away, or I try to think about what is the root cause of this problem. The number one answer, though, is right behind me. Go slow, because whatever it is that you're working on, it's most likely that you're going too fast. Even when you say slow it down to, I know Bob Reynolds talks about like 60 beats per minute or whatever. Yeah, 60 beats per minute or slower. And actually thinking about all the details that go into making a phrase, or making that note, or playing that pattern, or playing that lick. You've got to go slower than you think. This was beaten into my brain by my teacher, Steve Teray. But no, do it again. Do it slower. Do it slower. Think about each note. Create each note. Connect each note. Connect 3 notes. Connect 4 notes. Work on one interval at a time. If you can't hear a chord in a transcription, think about, okay, 3rd, 7th, 5th, 9th, 11th, 13th. Get all the notes, one at a time. Because when you slow down, you go one at a time. It sucks at first and it's super slow, but then it's faster and faster and faster and faster. And so you've just got to stick with it. You got to be really, really focused. So I don't write down a problem and then ruminate on it. I take action right away. What is the root cause? Is it my flexibility? Is it my sound is bad today? Is it my tongue is not working? My articulation is not clean and clear? Is it my slide technique? Am I not breathing properly? Think about all the things that could be hindering you. Are you tense? Are you unfocused? Right? So there's not that many things, right? You know what they are. You know what your fundamentals are on your guitar or your trombone or your piano. You know what they are. And you have to think about, okay, if I put in enough time, or is my technique holding me back? Or my ears holding me back? Is my concept or conception of this music holding me back? Like, what is the thing? And then take action right away. Try to solve it. Is it going to get solved in a day? Probably not. But then say, okay, I know that I need to work on this every day because this is holding me back. And usually there's something at the root of whatever it is. If you're trying to play something, some exercise, it's probably either your articulation or your technique or your something that's getting in the way of executing it. Finding the root cause is the most important thing, because it's not about that piece of music, right? It has nothing to do with whatever the particular situation is. It's most likely you haven't sat down and dealt with the details. Who are some of your favorite non-trombonists to transcribe? Chick Corea is always a favorite, and he always plays something surprising. I'd like to transcribe Clifford Brown. I like to transcribe Freddie Hubbard. I did a bunch of, Brookmeyer, take that or leave it as trombone or not trombone, by Jerry Mulligan. Transcribed a bunch of Pat Metheny at one point, some Herbie Hancock at another point, and they all present unique challenges, Obviously, the further you get away from an air producing instrument, you go to piano, a lot of that stuff is way harder to figure out, how to play it cleanly and clearly than on the trombone. But I go in circles, like there was a long time where I was like, I'm not going to transcribe trombone, I'm not going to transcribe trombonist, trombone language is cliche, blah 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 blah. Around and around I would go. Just thinking like, I'm going to transcribe this other stuff. And then it's like, then I hear JJ again. And I go, oh, but that is killing. Part of the journey, right? You kind of go around in a circle, but just trying to trombonists always want to transcribe non-trombonists because they think that there's something else out there, which of course there is. And the more different opinions musically that you can get is great. But there's something about trying to blend it all together that is most important to me. Because there's certain things like, Charlie Parker just doesn't lay well on trombone. So a lot of the times it's an awkward register, so maybe you need to change the key, right? Or maybe you find another instrument that plays the same language but in a different way. So for me, that's like, okay, I spent a long time struggling with the omnibook, and I still struggle with the omnibook, and I still want to get better at that, playing that language. But then I looked at someone like Bud Powell, and I say it's very similar language, bebop, fundamental bebop language, but it's organized in a much more trombone-friendly kind of way. So for me, I think as a single note player, that Bud Powell stuff, that's really accessible in terms of learning the language. So for me, I try to find some stuff that kind of fits in the middle. Like, it can't be too hard to play on trombone that it's impossible, but hard enough that it's challenging is great. But then I always come back, Curtis and JJ and Slide. I just always come back to that stuff. That's the fundamental kind of core of the concept, and then you kind of expand out from there. What are your methods for practicing sight reading besides the obvious answer, just reading? When someone talks about getting better at sight reading, what you're actually mentally doing is getting better at pattern recognition. So what you're trying to do is become familiar with the different rhythms that exist, right? And you're trying to recognize them and know what they are before you see them. There's a method, it's called Dance Band Reading by Louis Belson. It's like a drum book, but the idea is pattern recognition, the recognition of the rhythms. There's only 4 places an offbeat can happen in 4/4. There's only so many places to put a triplet. There's only so many ways to combine the rhythms, because the rhythms is the most important thing when you're reading. If you can get better at reading rhythms, you're going to get better at sight reading, because the notes are the notes. And when you're sight reading, the accuracy of rhythm is more important than the accuracy of the notes. The notes is obviously important, but when you're reading in a group or in a professional situation, a few notes here and there, you probably can get away with. But if you play the wrong rhythm, it seems like you don't even know what you're doing. Rhythm, 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 rhythm. Get rhythm books, get drum books. Try to make sure you're doing these rhythms correctly. Don't move on until you know what it's supposed to sound like, That's what that rhythm sounds like. That's what this figure sounds like. And then read as much as you can. But you got to also read stuff that you have a reference for. If you just read in a vacuum, you might not even know when you're wrong. So you need to play along with people that are playing it correctly, so you can assess whether you did it right or you did it wrong. And then the third thing I'll say about that is that I think people don't hold themselves to high enough standard. I think literally the only reason that I got good at sight reading is because I changed my mind, that I was expecting that I would play it right the first time, every time. And I just said, you know what? I'm going to play it right the first time. Do I always? No. But 80 to 90% of the time, I do now. Not when I started, but like it was always a thing. Playing lots of gigs where you're reading is important. Getting in as many situations where you're reading as possible is important. But changing your mindset to like, I am a person that sight reads well. That is me. That's part of my identity. And then you put in the work and you hold yourself to that standard. So like when you read, you expect to do it correctly because you know what rhythms sound like. You've done the work, you've done the research. And so I think holding yourself accountable is super important. Fritz says rehearsal bands, that's a great place to read stuff and where a lot of reading happens. And you got to play hard stuff, And once you get good at sight reading hard stuff, the easy stuff is, well, easy, right? Outside of music, what is something that has been most interesting to you that is giving you fascination? How to run longer without injuring myself. That's something that fascinates me. How to unplug myself. I have been a person that has worked constantly, and I struggle to not work, whether it's practicing, whether it's my business, whether it's my teaching, whether it's on a home project, like just to be still. Something that fascinates me is the connection between your mental and physical health, meaning like trying to pursue having a clear mind are pretty fascinating. What are some good ways to practice translating what you hear in your head to the horn? Oh yeah, there's a couple of ways that I've used or heard other people talk about that I think are good ideas. So I'll try to share them both. So the first one is like Wycliffe Gordon. He was one of my first teachers. He has a book, a method. He just calls it Sing It First, right? And maybe that seems overly simplistic, but it really is part of it. Like sing something and then play it. And I know that sounds overly simplistic, and it definitely maybe doesn't translate to more complicated lines if you can't sing them, right? That's another story. However, so that's where I would start. So singing and playing simple phrases, getting more and more complex, more and more harmonically rich. So that's where I would start. From there, an approach that I like, there's two things. So Marshall Jokes would talk about practicing with a metronome, and every time you make a mistake, stopping and trying to fix what you thought you were going to play. So that requires a high level of self-awareness while you're playing. So there's two things that I would kind of take as maybe a precursor or in support of that idea, which I really love that idea. Stop when you're improvising and go back and fix yourself and go, what did I mean to play? What did I mean? What chord did this go over? What did I actually mean? So that's important. So stopping, focusing on the details of like what you meant to play in this specific spot and figuring out what that was, right? And then the next thing that's related to that is one, you could write yourself a chorus of solo and be able to sing and play it. One way something that I think is really interesting that a colleague of mine does in his class is get used to a set of chord changes and then scat a solo, right? So scat a solo, transcribe your scatting, and then fix it. So, like by fix, I mean like, what did you mean to play? What did you mean to write? And then you can go from there, right? So scat a solo, fix it, meaning what did you mean to play, and then play it again and see how that all relates. So, I mean, that's kind of like a long answer. I mean, multifaceted answer, but you got to be able to sing and play simple stuff first, and then either write solos or do some combination of stopping while you're playing and figuring it out, or doing it like this where you sing something, record yourself singing it, and then transcribe it and fix it so you can kind of see how all the pieces fit together. You have two options. You can only drive back to New York City but can listen to whatever you want, or two, you can fly back but only in a middle seat between two people talking only about Broadway music every time and no headphones for you. Which one are you choosing? So for context, driving back to New York from Denton, from Dallas, it takes 2 days. It's 21 and a half hours. I'm going to pick flying because there's no way to drive back each and every time, even though I have to talk about those people. It would give me a chance to practice my meditation or my inner calm. There's nothing wrong with Broadway music. It's just not always my favorite. Who was the last professional musician you had a meaningful discussion with, and how was it impactful to you? I always have a good conversation with Lucas Pino, about things. We tend to talk about that a good amount. I also talk to Ryan Truesdell about these type of things a lot. We talk a lot about like concept, and we talk a lot about reality versus not reality, delusion. But yeah, I have impactful conversations about music or non-music with people. What is a good harmonic note to resolve from besides the 5 chord? So if you think about resolutions as counterpoint, as species counterpoint, you can resolve from any note to another note. You have to be able to, I think, from any chord, you should be able to resolve in some way to the next chord. It's always motion. It's always forward motion, tension to release. So if you're on a tense note, you probably want to resolve to a consonant note. If you're on a consonant note, maybe you want to create tension on the next chord. You have to kind of think about it that way. So you should be able to do it you should be able to resolve from every note. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Right? I mean, those are the same things. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13. All of them voice lead to the next chord. Do you have a definite number of how many new trombonists are getting in the studio next year? I accepted, I think there's 9 new trombonists, including DMA, masters, and undergrad. Might be 8, but I think it's 9. Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining today. I am going to sign off for today, but before we do that, I'm just going to recap a little bit about what I said we were going to announce today, which is the guest artist for our jazz trombone boot camp. And so I am excited that I announced today Jennifer Wharton of Bonegasm and also Dion Tucker of the Chops Shop. That's his YouTube channel. So we're going to have a lot of great time, great hang, great conversations during Jazz Trombone Boot Camp, which is June 13th through 17th. So you can check out nickfinzer.store to get registered, and can't wait to see you then. As always, we'll have more Q&As next week. I'll be in New York for the Gil Evans project at Dizzy's, so there'll be no Q&A. The week after that, we'll be in Montana, so I don't think I'll be able to do a Q&A on that Tuesday. So we'll be on a couple-week break for now, but we'll be back again, I promise. So thanks for a great 105 episodes so far, something like that. You can stay tuned to the YouTube channel if you didn't know, if you see these, we record them and then we kind of edit them down to kind of be a little bit more condensed, and I post them again. So there's the live stream, which is the full versions, and then if you missed one, you want to watch the kind of condensed version of the hour live streams into 15, 20 minutes. Those get posted as well. I don't know if people know that, but they do indeed get posted. So don't worry, you'll find me. Anyway, have a great day. If you're in Denton, we'll hope to see you this Friday to celebrate our graduating master students and the end of the school year. So take care, and we'll catch you next time.